The storm had raged for 3 days and 3 nights, battering the outskirts of Rome with a fury that seemed almost divine in its wrath. Rain fell in sheets so thick that the world beyond Livia's small window became nothing more than a gray blur, punctuated by the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the swollen Tiber River in the distance. She had lived in this modest stone cottage for 5 years now, ever since her husband Marcus had fallen in the Germanic campaigns, leaving her with nothing but memories and the small vegetable garden that kept her from starvation. The walls of her home, though sturdy enough, trembled with each thunderclap, and the roof leaked in 3 places despite her best efforts to patch it with mud and straw. Livia had spent those 3 days huddled by her meager fire, rationing the last of her grain and listening to the wind howl like some monstrous creature trying to claw its way inside. She prayed to the household gods, to Jupiter, master of storms, to any deity who might listen to the pleas of a poor widow, asking only that her small home might survive one more tempest. On the 4th morning, when the storm finally broke, Livia wrapped her worn woolen cloak around her shoulders and ventured out to assess the damage. The air smelled of wet earth and broken vegetation, heavy with the peculiar freshness that always followed great storms. The path to the river was muddy and treacherous, littered with broken branches and debris carried down from the hills. She picked her way carefully, her sandals squelching in the soft earth, her eyes scanning the transformed landscape. The river had overflowed its banks, claiming portions of the road and leaving behind pools of standing water that reflected the clearing sky like fragments of polished silver. Livia had come to check her fishing traps, though she held little hope of finding them intact after such a deluge. Fish meant the difference between eating and going hungry for another day, and she had learned long ago that survival required venturing out even when comfort and safety counseled otherwise. The widow's life was not one of leisure or choice. It was an endless succession of small necessities, each one as vital as breath itself. It was near one of these pools that she heard it, a sound so faint she almost mistook it for the cry of a bird. But there it was again, a whimper, weak and desperate, distinctly human. Livia's heart quickened as she followed the sound, pushing through a tangle of reeds and rushes until she saw her. A child. A little girl, no more than 5 or 6 years old, clinging to a piece of driftwood at the water's edge. Her small body was trembling violently, her lips blue with cold, her dark hair plastered to her pale face. But it was her eyes that made Livia's breath catch in her throat. They gleamed with an unnatural golden light, like embers in the dim morning air, like coins of the gods themselves set in her small face, marking her as something other, something touched by forces beyond mortal understanding. Livia had heard the whispers in the marketplace, the old stories told by grandmothers around winter fires. Golden eyes were the mark of the blessed or the cursed. They belonged to those chosen by the gods, whether for glory or damnation. Children born with such eyes were said to be favored by Jupiter himself, destined for greatness, or they were marked by the Furies, condemned to lives of tragedy and misfortune. Most people would have turned away, afraid of bringing divine wrath upon their heads, terrified of entangling themselves with the designs of immortals. But Livia saw only what mattered, a child, alone and dying in the cold morning air. Without hesitation, she waded into the cold water, ignoring the shock that lanced through her legs like knives of ice. The girl was barely conscious, her small hand still gripping the wood with the last of her strength, her knuckles white and raw. "It's all right, little one," Livia murmured, her voice soft and steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. "I've got you. You're safe now. The storm is over." And she gathered the child into her arms, surprised by how light she was, as if the storm had already stolen half her substance. The girl's head lolled against Livia's shoulder, and those strange golden eyes flickered open for just a moment, focusing on her face with an intensity that seemed far too ancient for one so young. In that brief gaze, Livia saw something that made her soul tremble, a depth of knowledge, a weight of sorrow that no child should carry. Then the eyes closed again, and the child went limp in her arms. Livia hurried back to her cottage, the girl wrapped tightly in her cloak, pressed against her chest for warmth. Her own body heat, though diminished by years of sparse meals and hard living, was all she had to offer. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. Where had this child come from? How had she ended up in the river? Where were her parents? What noble family would be searching frantically for their golden-eyed daughter? But those questions would have to wait. Right now, survival was all that mattered. and Livia knew more about survival than she had ever wanted to learn. Inside her small home, Livia worked with the efficiency born of necessity. She built up the fire in the hearth until it roared, feeding it with wood she had been saving for the coldest nights of winter, filling the single room with blessed warmth. She stripped away the girl's sodden clothing, a dress of fine linen, now ruined, but clearly expensive, with embroidery at the hem that spoke of wealth and status far beyond Livia's own. The thread was real gold, she realized with growing astonishment. This child came from a family of considerable power. She dried the small body with rough towels, noting with a physician's eye the absence of any serious wounds, though bruises were beginning to bloom across the pale skin like dark flowers. She wrapped her in every blanket she owned, threadbare though they were, before laying her on the bed. The only bed which meant Livia would sleep on the floor tonight, but that was a small sacrifice. For hours, Livia tended to her unexpected charge, spooning warm broth between the girl's lips, bathing her forehead with cloths dipped in heated water, whispering prayers to Juno, protector of children, and to any god who might be listening. The child remained unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady, those remarkable eyes hidden behind delicate eyelids that occasionally fluttered as if she dreamed troubled dreams. As evening approached and shadows lengthened across the floor, Livia finally allowed herself to sit, exhaustion washing over her like a tide. She studied the girl's face in the firelight, noting the aristocratic bone structure, the quality of her skin despite its pallor, the small hands that had never known labor or hardship. This was no peasant child. Someone would be looking for her, someone with power and resources and perhaps anger at whoever had allowed such a precious thing to be lost. The thought should have brought relief, but instead, Livia felt a strange reluctance, an unexpected surge of protectiveness toward this mysterious waif who had drifted into her life on the storm's current. She reached out and gently brushed a strand of drying hair from the girl's forehead, her touch as tender as if this were her own daughter, the daughter she had never been blessed to have. "Who are you, little one?" she whispered. "And what have the gods planned for you?" The child stirred at her touch, and for a moment those golden eyes opened again, clearer now, more focused. She looked at Livia with a solemnity that seemed impossible in one so young, and her lips moved, forming a single word so softly that Livia had to lean close to hear it. "Papa." Then sleep claimed her once more, and Livia was left alone with her questions, and the growing certainty that in saving this child, she had set something in motion that would change everything. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying with it the distant sound of hoofbeats on the road. Or perhaps it was only thunder, the storm's last warning before it moved on to trouble other lands. Livia pulled her own thin blanket around her shoulders and settled into the chair beside the bed, determined to keep watch through the night. Whatever was coming, whatever forces had sent this golden-eyed child into her care, she would face them. She had lost everything once before. She had learned to survive. And now, perhaps, she had found something worth protecting again. The fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and in the distance, something howled, a sound too large and too wild to be any natural wolf. Livia shivered and drew closer to the sleeping child, wondering what dawn would bring, and whether she had saved a blessing or invited a curse into her humble home. 3 days passed in uneasy peace. The child, who had whispered her name as Aurora during brief moments of wakefulness, slowly regained her strength under Livia's careful ministrations. The widow fed her warm broths made from the last of her winter stores, sang her the old lullabies her own mother had once sung to her, and told her stories of gentle gods and happy endings, though she believed in neither anymore. Aurora rarely spoke beyond simple words. Yes, no, thank you. But her golden eyes followed Livia everywhere, watching with that same unsettling intensity, as if measuring the widow's soul against some cosmic scale only she could see. When Livia asked her about her family, about where she had come from, the child would only shake her head and press closer to her rescuer, small hands clutching at Livia's worn tunic. The widow tried not to think too deeply about the implications of harboring this mysterious child. Surely someone would come looking. Surely a family wealthy enough to dress their daughter in gold-threaded silk would move heaven and earth to find her. Yet the road remained empty, and no searchers came to knock upon her door. It was as if the storm had deposited Aurora from some other world entirely, a gift or a curse left on Livia's doorstep by capricious gods. On the evening of the third day, as Livia was preparing their simple meal of bread and beans, the earth began to tremble. It started as a subtle vibration, like the purring of some great cat deep within the ground. The cups on Livia's shelf rattled against each other, and dust drifted down from the ceiling beams. She looked up sharply, her hands stilling over the pot, her heart beginning to race with a primal fear. Earthquakes were not unknown in Rome, but this felt different, purposeful, as if the earth itself were announcing the arrival of something powerful. Aurora sat bolt upright in the bed, her golden eyes wide and gleaming in the firelight. For the first time since Livia had found her, the child spoke in full sentences, her voice carrying a strange, urgent quality. "He's coming. Papa is coming. You have to hide me, Livia. Please, you have to hide me." But before Livia could respond, before she could ask what danger threatened, 3 heavy blows fell upon her door. Boom, 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 like the beating of a war drum. The sound reverberated through the small cottage, and Livia felt it in her chest, in her bones, in the very marrow of her being. This was not the knock of a neighbor, or even a Roman official. This was the knock of something other. Aurora. The voice that came through the door was deep and rough, like stone grinding against stone. Yet underneath its harshness lay an undercurrent of desperate anguish. "Aurora, I know you're in there. I can feel you. Come out, child. It's time to go home." Livia looked at the little girl, whose face had gone pale as milk, then back at the door. Every instinct screamed at her to open it, to surrender the child to whoever had come for her, to extract herself from this situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond anything she could control. But Aurora's small hand had found hers, gripping with surprising strength, and those golden eyes pleaded with her in a way no words could match. The widow took a deep breath, straightened her spine, and called out, "Who are you? What business do you have at a poor widow's home at this hour?" A long silence followed, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the sound of Aurora's rapid breathing. Then the voice came again, softer now, but no less powerful, carrying with it the weight of barely controlled fury. "My name is Cassian. The child you shelter is my daughter. Return her to me, and I will leave you in peace. Refuse, and—" He stopped abruptly, and Livia heard what sounded like a man fighting with himself, a low growl that raised the hairs on the back of her neck. Cassian. The name struck her like a physical blow. Everyone in Rome knew that name, though most spoke it only in whispers. Cassian, the legendary general who had conquered territories from Britannia to the edges of Parthia. Cassian, who they said could not be killed in battle, who moved with inhuman speed and fought with the strength of 10 men. Cassian, whom the soldiers called the Wolf of Rome, and whom the priests whispered was cursed by the gods themselves for defying the natural order of war. The stories varied, but all agreed on certain points. Cassian had been a man once, a brilliant military commander who had displeased the gods. Some said Mars, others claimed it was Jupiter himself, by refusing to slaughter defeated enemies, by showing mercy when Rome demanded blood. As punishment, the gods had cursed him to become the very instrument of war he had tried to resist. In battle, it was said, his body transformed into something between man and beast, a creature of fur and fang and unstoppable violence. He became the slaughter he had refused to deliver. And this creature, this legend, this cursed warrior of the gods, was standing outside her door, asking for his daughter. Livia's hands trembled as she moved to place herself between Aurora and the door. "The child was dying when I found her," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "She was clinging to driftwood in the river after the storm. I took her in and cared for her because it was the right thing to do. If you are her father, then tell me, how did she end up in the water? What kind of father loses his child to a storm?" The growl that answered her was decidedly inhuman, and Livia heard the sound of wood splintering as if massive claws had gouged deep furrows in her door. Aurora whimpered and pressed her face against Livia's back. The widow stood her ground, though her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. "You dare!" The words were barely coherent, more snarl than speech. Then another long pause, another sound of internal struggle, and when Cassian spoke again, his voice had returned to something approaching human, though it carried an exhaustion that spoke of endless battles fought both without and within. "You dare to question me? You know nothing of what I've sacrificed, what I've endured to keep her safe. There are those who would use her against me, who would hurt her to hurt me. I hid her where I thought no one could find her. But the storm, the gods sent the storm. They always find a way to punish me anew. Despite her fear, despite every rational thought screaming at her to simply open the door and end this, Livia felt something shift in her chest. She heard the pain in his voice, the raw grief of a father who had lost his child and blamed himself. She knew that particular agony, though her loss had come differently, through a husband taken by war rather than a child taken by water. "Then let me see you," she said, surprising herself with her own boldness. "Let me look upon you and know that you are truly her father and not some demon wearing his name. If you are what the stories say, prove to me that there's still a man behind the monster." Another long silence. The trembling in the earth intensified, then gradually stilled. Livia heard the sound of deep breathing, like someone trying to master themselves through sheer force of will. Finally, Cassian spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you open this door, widow, you will see things that will haunt your dreams. I am trying to maintain control, but my curse fights me every moment. The beast knows my daughter is near, and it wants to protect her in the only way it knows, through violence and blood. It doesn't understand doors or courtesy or the kindness of strangers. It only understands threats and how to eliminate them." "Then we are at an impasse," Livia said, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Behind her, Aurora had begun to cry softly, and the sound of it nearly broke the widow's resolve. "I will not give a child to someone I cannot see, curse or no curse, and you cannot enter without breaking down this door, which I suspect would cost you what little control you have left." A sound that might have been a laugh, bitter and harsh, came from beyond the door. "You are either the bravest woman in Rome or the most foolish, perhaps both. Very well, widow, I will show you what I am, but the child must not see. Cover her eyes." Livia turned to Aurora, whose golden eyes swam with tears, and gently placed her hands over them. "Close your eyes, little one, and don't open them until I say. Can you do that for me?" The child nodded and squeezed her eyes shut beneath Livia's palms. Satisfied, the widow turned back to face the door, her hands falling away from Aurora's face to rest at her sides. She stood alone now, vulnerable, separated from the legendary Wolf of Rome by nothing more than wood and iron and her own questionable courage. "I'm ready," she said, and wondered if she had just made the last mistake of her life. The door opened slowly, and Cassian stepped into the firelight. Livia had prepared herself to face a monster. What she saw instead stole the breath from her lungs and left her momentarily frozen, caught between terror and an unexpected surge of something that felt dangerously like compassion. Cassian was massive, easily a head taller than any man she had ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to fill the doorway. He wore the remnants of a military cloak, torn and stained with mud and what might have been old blood, and beneath it she could see scarred leather armor that had seen countless battles. His arms were bare, corded with muscle that seemed almost sculptural in the firelight, and his hands, those hands were tipped with claws that gleamed like polished obsidian, curving and sharp, neither fully human nor fully beast. But it was his face that captured her attention and held it mercilessly. He was handsome in the way that dangerous things often are. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened with several days' worth of stubble, a mouth set in a grim line of perpetual suffering. His hair, black as a raven's wing, fell to his shoulders in wild tangles, yet it was his eyes that told the true story of his curse. They were the same golden color as Aurora's, bright, luminous, and utterly inhuman. But where the child's eyes held innocence and wonder, his burned with an inner fire that spoke of barely controlled violence, of a beast pacing endlessly behind bars that grew thinner with each passing moment. Dark fur had begun to emerge along his forearms, and his breathing came in harsh, labored pants that showed teeth just slightly too sharp to be fully human. The air around him seemed to shimmer with suppressed energy, with the raw power of something wild fighting against invisible chains. "Well?" His voice was strained, each word clearly costing him effort. "Have you seen enough, widow? Do you believe me now, or do I need to let the beast free entirely? I warn you, if I do that, I cannot promise your safety." Livia forced herself to meet those burning golden eyes, to look past the claws and the fury and the supernatural terror radiating from him. She looked for the father Aurora had called for, the man who had hidden his daughter to protect her, and there, in the trembling of his clawed hands, in the profound exhaustion etched into every line of his face, she found him. "I see you," she said softly, "not just the curse. I see a father who has been searching for his child. I see a man who is fighting himself to remain in control." Something in Cassian's expression cracked. "You should fear me," he said, and there was almost a plea in his words. "I am Rome's weapon, their cursed champion, the thing they unleash when they need victory at any cost. I have killed more men than I can count, and the beast within me hungers always for more. You should run from me." "But you are human," Livia countered. "Whatever curse the gods placed upon you, right now you are a father standing at my door, asking for his daughter. That is the most human thing I can imagine." Behind her, Aurora had opened her eyes despite Livia's instructions, and the child let out a small cry. "Papa, you found me! But you're changing. Remember the breathing?" Cassian's eyes snapped to his daughter, and Livia watched as the warrior's entire demeanor shifted. The fury drained from his face, replaced by naked vulnerability, and love so fierce it was almost painful to witness. "Aurora," he breathed. "Little light, are you hurt? I've been searching for 3 days, following the river, tracking your scent through the storm. When I couldn't find you, I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought the gods had taken you from me entirely." The child slipped past Livia, running to her father on unsteady legs. Cassian dropped to his knees and Aurora threw her small arms around his neck. Livia watched, ready to intervene, as the massive warrior buried his face in his daughter's hair and wept silently, his shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry, Papa," Aurora whispered, her small hands patting his back. "I got scared in the cave when the storm came, and the water started rising, and I fell, and then the river took me. I called for you, but the storm was too loud." "Never apologize," Cassian said fiercely, pulling back to cup his daughter's face in his clawed hands with impossible gentleness. "Never apologize for surviving. You are braver than any soldier I've commanded. The gods themselves cannot claim you. I will not allow it." Livia felt intrusive watching this private moment, but she couldn't look away. Here was the legendary Wolf of Rome, the cursed warrior feared across the empire, reduced to a kneeling father clutching his child as if she were the only thing tethering him to his humanity. "Livia saved me," Aurora said, turning to smile at the widow. "She pulled me from the water and brought me to her home and gave me her bed and her food and sang to me when I had nightmares. She's kind, Papa." Cassian's eyes met Livia's over his daughter's head. The widow saw the assessment in his gaze, the warrior's instinct to evaluate threats and allies, but also something deeper, a grudging respect that this stranger had cared for his most precious treasure when he could not. Slowly, with obvious effort, Cassian rose to his feet, keeping one hand on Aurora's shoulder. The firelight cast shifting shadows across his half-transformed features, making him look like something from old myths, a being caught between two worlds. He inclined his head to Livia in a gesture that conveyed both gratitude and apology. "You saved my daughter's life," he said, his voice rough but sincere. "There is no repayment sufficient for such a debt. If you wish for gold, what little I have is yours. If you wish for protection, my sword is at your disposal. If you wish for me to leave and never return, I will respect that." Livia looked at the warrior, at the child clinging to him, at the small cottage that had been her lonely prison for 5 years. She thought of her husband, dead in some foreign land, his body never returned for proper burial. She thought of the empty years stretching before her, survival without purpose, and she thought of the past 3 days, of having Aurora's bright presence fill her home, of feeling needed again. "I want nothing," she said finally, and saw surprise flicker across Cassian's face. "Or rather, I want only to know that Aurora is well and safe. Will she be? Can you protect her from whatever threats drove you to hide her?" Cassian's expression darkened, and the beast stirred behind his eyes. "There are factions in Rome who seek to use me, to control me through leverage. They know I cannot refuse orders when Aurora's life hangs in the balance. I thought if I hid her away, if no one knew where she was, I could fight without that sword over our heads. But the gods—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "The gods want me to suffer. They sent the storm to take her from me. Or," Livia said quietly, "the gods sent the storm to bring her to me, so that you would come here, so that we would meet. Perhaps not everything is punishment, Cassian. Perhaps some things are simply fate." The warrior stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign tongue, as if the concept of fate as anything other than cruelty was incomprehensible. Aurora tugged on her father's cloak, looking between the two adults. "I like Livia," she announced with a child's simple certainty. "She's nice. Can she come with us, Papa? Our house is big and empty, and she's all alone here." "Aurora," Cassian said gently. We cannot simply take Livia from her home. I have nothing, Livia interrupted, surprising herself. No family, no prospects, no purpose beyond surviving one more day. If you're asking, if Aurora is asking, then yes, I will come with you. I will help you protect her. Cassian looked at her for a long moment, conflict raging behind those golden eyes. Trust did not come easily to him, but finally, slowly, he nodded. Then pack what you need, he said. We leave within the hour. I have a villa on the outskirts of the city, away from prying eyes. You will be safe there. As Livia turned to gather her few possessions, she felt the weight of what she had agreed to settle upon her shoulders. She was binding herself to the cursed warrior of Rome, to his hunted daughter, to a fate she could neither predict nor control. But as she looked back at Aurora's beaming smile and saw the faintest softening in Cassian's fierce expression, Livia felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 long years. She felt hope. The villa stood on a hillside overlooking Rome, far enough from the city's crowded streets to offer privacy, yet close enough that the distant glow of torches painted the night sky with amber light. It was larger than Livia had expected, a sprawling structure of stone and timber that spoke of wealth, though not the ostentatious kind favored by senators and patricians. This was a soldier's home, functional and fortified, with high walls and narrow windows that could be easily defended. Cassian led them through gates that groaned on iron hinges, across a courtyard where a fountain stood dry and silent, its basin filled with fallen leaves. The villa had the air of a place long abandoned, though Livia could see signs of recent habitation. A lamp burning in one window, smoke rising from a chimney, the faint smell of bread baking. I keep only a small staff, Cassian explained as he ushered them inside, his voice carefully neutral. An old soldier who served under me, his wife who cooks and cleans, and their son who tends the grounds. They know what I am, and they keep their silence. They will not speak of you to anyone. Aurora had fallen asleep against her father's shoulder during the journey, exhausted by the reunion and the excitement. Cassian carried her with a tenderness that seemed at odds with his fearsome appearance, the claws that could rend armor as easily as cloth now cradling his daughter as if she were made of glass. Livia followed him through corridors lit by oil lamps, past rooms filled with simple furniture and walls bare of decoration. There were no trophies of war here, no captured standards or weapons mounted for display. If anything, the villa seemed determined to forget that its master was Rome's most legendary warrior. This will be your room, Cassian said, pushing open a door with his shoulder. Inside was a chamber twice the size of Livia's entire cottage, with a proper bed, a chest for belongings, and a window that looked out over the darkened countryside. It's next to Aurora's. I thought, he paused, seeming uncertain. I thought you might want to be near her. She has nightmares sometimes. About the curse. About what she's seen. What has she seen? Livia asked quietly, though part of her feared the answer. Cassian's jaw tightened. Too much. The transformation. It's not clean, not quick. When the battle rage takes me, when the beast emerges fully, I become something that should not exist. Aurora has seen it twice. Once when assassins came in the night, when she was only 3 years old. I killed them all, but she watched through a crack in the door. And once, his voice dropped to barely a whisper, once I came home from battle still changed, still lost in the bloodlust. She ran to greet me, and I nearly... He couldn't finish the sentence. Livia felt her heart constrict. But you didn't. No. Her voice reached me somehow, pulled me back from the edge. But the fact that I could have, that for a moment I didn't recognize my own child. He shook his head. That's why I hide her. Not just from Rome's enemies, but from myself. On nights when I feel the curse stirring, when the beast prowls close to the surface, I lock myself away where I cannot reach her. He moved to Aurora's door, adjacent to Livia's, and carefully laid his daughter on the bed inside. The room was clearly a child's sanctuary. There were carved wooden toys on shelves, colorful blankets, drawings pinned to the walls. One showed a large figure with golden eyes holding hands with a small figure, both smiling under a bright sun. The contrast between the innocent artwork and the reality of their situation made Livia's throat tight. Cassian removed his daughter's shoes, pulled a blanket over her small form, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. When he straightened and turned back to Livia, the firelight caught his face, and she saw the exhaustion there, the bone-deep weariness of a man who had been fighting for so long he'd forgotten what peace felt like. You should rest, he said. Tomorrow I'll introduce you to Marcus, my steward, and his family. They'll help you settle in. If you need anything, will you be all right?" Livia interrupted. The question surprised them both. Cassian stared at her. "What? Tonight? Will you be all right? You've been maintaining your human form for hours now. I can see the strain it's causing." And she could. The tremor in his hands, the way his breathing had become labored, the sheen of sweat on his brow despite the cool evening air. "I'll manage," he said curtly. "I always do." "Where will you sleep?" "The barracks building across the courtyard. Far enough that if I lose control—" He stopped. "You needn't worry about me, widow. I've survived this curse for 10 years. I'll survive another night." But as he turned to leave, Livia saw him stumble slightly, saw his hand reach out to brace against the wall. The claws scraped against stone, leaving deep furrows. Without thinking, she reached out and caught his arm, and immediately regretted it as he whirled on her with inhuman speed, those golden eyes blazing with sudden fury. For a heartbeat, she stared death in the face. His claws were raised, his lips pulled back from sharpening teeth, every line of his body coiled to strike. The beast had surged forward at her touch, interpreting it as threat or challenge. But Livia didn't pull away. She didn't scream or cower. She simply held his gaze, her hand still resting on his arm, and spoke in the same gentle voice she'd used with Aurora during those first frightening hours. "Cassian, you're in your home. You're safe. Aurora is safe. I am not your enemy." She watched the internal battle play out across his features, the beast wanting to lash out, the man fighting desperately to regain control. His chest heaved with the effort, his entire body trembling like a bowstring pulled too taut. Then, gradually, the fury drained from his eyes. The claws lowered, his breathing slowed. "I could have killed you," he said hoarsely. "Do you understand that? 1 second longer and I would have torn out your throat without even meaning to. But you didn't," Livia said simply. "You didn't, because you're stronger than the curse, stronger than the gods who placed it on you." Cassian laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You think I'm strong? I'm a slave to this affliction. The gods made me their weapon, and I dance on their strings like a puppet. There is no strength in that, only endless submission." "You're wrong," Livia surprised herself with her vehemence. "A weapon doesn't weep for its daughter. A puppet doesn't fight its own nature to protect those it loves. You are not what they made you, Cassian. You are what you choose to be, in moments like these, when you pull yourself back from the edge." He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "How can you speak to me this way? How can you stand there knowing what I am and not fear me?" "I was married to a soldier," Livia said quietly. "Not a cursed one, but a soldier nonetheless. He went to war in Germania 5 years ago and never came home. They told me he died bravely, that he gave his life for Rome's glory, but they never brought his body back. I never got to say goodbye, never got to tell him." Her voice caught. "I know what it means to fight battles that never end. I know what it costs. So yes, I see the curse. I see the claws and the beast in your eyes. But I also see a man who is fighting the hardest battle of all, the one against himself, and I choose not to fear that man." Silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sound of wind through the courtyard. Cassian's expression had softened into something Livia couldn't quite read. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion, or the tentative beginning of something that might, in time, become trust. "You are a strange woman, Livia of Rome," he said finally, "and you are a strange warrior, Cassian the Wolf." She managed a small smile. "I suppose we're well matched in our strangeness." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. For just a moment she glimpsed the man he might have been before the gods claimed him for their purposes. "Stay in the villa tonight," she said impulsively. "Not in the barracks. There are other rooms here, aren't there? Stay close. If the curse troubles you, if you feel control slipping—" "Aurora's voice helps," you said. "Perhaps—" She hesitated, then plunged forward. "Perhaps mine could too. That's not your burden to bear. I'm choosing to bear it anyway." She squeezed his arm gently before releasing it. "Let someone help you, Cassian. Let someone stand watch while you rest. You've been alone too long." He looked at her for a long moment, and Livia saw the walls he'd built around himself, the fortress of isolation he'd constructed to protect others from his curse, and perhaps to protect himself from caring about anyone beyond his daughter. She watched those walls waver, saw the desperate longing for human connection warring with the fear of what he might destroy. "All right," he said at last, so quietly she almost missed it. "There's a room down the hall. I'll stay there tonight." "Good." Livia stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they'd been standing, how intimate this conversation had become. "Then I'll see you in the morning. Try to sleep, warrior. Even God's weapons need rest." As she retreated to her room and closed the door, Livia leaned against it and released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her hands were shaking, delayed reaction to how close she'd come to death, perhaps, or simply the accumulated stress of the past few hours. She had bound herself to a cursed warrior and his hunted daughter. She had left behind the only life she'd known, meager as it was. She had touched the beast and lived, and tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new moments of standing between a man and his curse. But for tonight, in this room that was larger and warmer than any she'd ever called her own, with Aurora sleeping peacefully next door and Cassian somewhere nearby fighting his endless battle, Livia felt something she'd thought lost forever. She felt like she belonged. 3 weeks passed in an uneasy rhythm that gradually settled into something approaching normalcy. Livia rose each morning to help Claudia prepare breakfast, spent her days teaching Aurora letters and numbers, mending clothes, tending the neglected garden. She learned the household's routines, its secrets, its careful dance around the master who was both protector and potential threat. Cassian remained distant, polite but guarded. He trained each morning in the courtyard, his movements precise and deadly even in practice. He took his meals alone, emerging only to spend quiet evenings with Aurora, reading to her or listening to her chatter. He never stayed long after the child went to bed, always retreating to his room or disappearing into the night. But Livia noticed things. The trembling of his hands when he thought no one watched, the deep circles under his eyes, how he avoided touching anything unnecessarily, as if afraid his claws might emerge without warning. And on certain nights howls echoed from beyond the villa walls, sounds too large and too anguished to be natural wolves. On those mornings, Cassian would appear hollow-eyed and silent, new scratches visible on his arms. Aurora would climb into his lap without fear, her small presence the only thing that seemed to ease his torment. It was on one such morning that Marcus burst into the hall where they were breaking their fast. "Soldiers!" the old steward gasped, his face pale. Imperial soldiers coming up the road, at least 20, bearing the Emperor's seal. The effect on Cassian was instantaneous. His body went rigid, his eyes flaring gold as the beast surged forward. Aurora's cup clattered to the table. "How long?" Cassian's voice had already begun to deepen, acquiring that inhuman rasp. "Minutes, maybe less." "Papa, no." Aurora reached for her father, but Livia was faster, pulling the child back even as Cassian rose. The transformation was beginning, fur rippling along his arms, his frame expanding, claws extending fully. "Cassian, wait." Livia stepped forward, placing herself between him and the door. "You don't know why they're here. If you attack Imperial soldiers, you'll give them exactly the excuse they need to declare you a threat to Rome itself. They've come for Aurora." Each word was a growl now. "They use her to control me, to force me into battles. I won't let them take her. Then don't give them the monster. Give them the man. Face them as a general, not as the wolf. I'm not in control." The roar shook the rafters and Aurora began to cry. The sound seemed to pain Cassian more than any wound, and he pressed his clawed hands to his head. Every moment is a battle, every breath a fight to remain human. And now they threaten the only thing I have left. "You have more than that." Livia reached out and placed her hand on his arm. The fur was coarse beneath her palm, the muscles trembling with suppressed rage. "You have people here who care about you, who see you as more than a weapon. Don't become the monster they tried to make you." Aurora's voice cut through the tension. "You're not a monster, Papa. You're the man who reads me stories and checks under my bed for spiders. That's who you are." Livia felt the moment the words reached him, the shudder that ran through his frame, the way his breathing began to slow. The fur receded gradually. The claws remained, but his eyes cleared. When he spoke, his voice was his own. "I'm sorry. You shouldn't have to pull me back. We need you to face those soldiers without bloodshed," Livia said firmly. "Can you do that?" Heavy footsteps echoed outside. Cassian took a deep breath, and when he opened his eyes, she saw the warrior emerge, the general who had commanded legions. He straightened his shoulders and nodded. "Marcus, take Aurora to her room. Livia, stand with me. If they see I'm not alone, perhaps they'll think twice about their threats." The door burst open and soldiers poured in, armor gleaming, hands on sword hilts. At their head strode an officer in crimson, carrying a sealed scroll. "Cassian," called the wolf, the officer announced. "I bring orders from Emperor Hadrian. The Dacian tribes have risen in revolt along the northern frontier. They've slaughtered 2 cohorts. The Emperor requires your particular talents to quell this uprising." "I am retired from active service," Cassian said levelly. "I've earned the right to live in peace." The officer's smile was cruel. "You were never given permission to retire. You're an asset of the Empire. Besides," his gaze slid to Aurora, "the Emperor has concerns about the girl, about whether she shares your affliction. It would be unfortunate if she needed to be taken to the palace for observation." The threat was clear. Livia felt Cassian go rigid. The beast surged forward again, fur rippling along his arms. Without thinking, Livia stepped directly in front of Cassian and faced the officer. "How dare you?" she said, her voice sharp despite her terror. "How dare you come into this man's home, threaten his child, and demand he become your attack dog? He has bled for Rome. He has endured a curse given by the gods themselves. What more do you want? His soul? His daughter's life?" The officer's face darkened. "Who are you to speak to an imperial messenger? You're nobody. I am Livia, widow of Marcus Antonius, who died in Germania. I am the woman who saved Cassian's daughter when your empire couldn't protect her. And if you threaten this child again, you will discover there are worse things than cursed warriors to fear." Silence fell. The officer stared at her, hand moving toward his sword. Then Cassian's hand settled on her shoulder, gently, carefully. "The widow speaks for me. I have given Rome everything. But there is a limit. You will leave. Report to the Emperor that I require 3 days to settle my affairs. Then I will come to the frontier and end your revolt. But this is the last time. After this, my debt to Rome is paid. And if any man threatens my family again, they will learn what the wolf can do when he stops holding back." The officer had gone pale. He clutched his scroll, torn between duty and fear. Finally, he nodded curtly. 3 days. The Emperor expects you by week's end." He gestured to his men, and they retreated hastily. When the door closed, Cassian released a breath that carried the weight of centuries. He swayed, and Livia moved to support him. "You fool," he muttered without heat. "You magnificent fool. Do you know what he could have done to you?" "The same things he's done to you," Livia replied. "But I'm harder to break than I look." Aurora ran to them, wrapping her arms around both. "You stopped changing, Papa. You stayed yourself." "Because of you both," Cassian said quietly. "When I was about to lose myself, I heard your voices, felt your touch. Somehow that was enough." He looked at Livia. "How is that possible?" "Because you're not fighting alone anymore." Cassian simply looked at her, and Livia saw the walls around his heart beginning to crack. 3 days, he said, "to prepare, to arrange for Aurora's protection. Then I go to war one final time." He paused. "Will you stay? Will you watch over her while I'm gone? You understand her in ways others don't. I need to know she'll have you." "I'll stay," Livia promised, "for as long as she needs me, for as long as you need me." "Then I suppose," Cassian said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, "I had better survive this final battle. I find myself having something to come home to." There, in the morning light, with Aurora pressed between them and war looming ahead, Livia understood she had become part of something far larger than she'd intended. She wasn't just sheltering a child. She was anchoring a warrior's humanity, becoming the tether that kept him connected to the world beyond the gods' cruel games. It was terrifying and exhilarating. It was exactly where she was meant to be. The 3 days passed too quickly. Cassian spent them preparing for war with methodical precision, yet with desperate urgency. He sharpened his weapons in the courtyard while Aurora played nearby, as if memorizing the sound of her laughter. He reviewed the villa's defenses with Marcus, ensuring every entrance could be secured. He wrote letters, sealed documents entrusted to his steward with instructions they be opened only if he failed to return within a month. And he spent long evenings with Livia, teaching her things she'd never imagined needing to know. "If men come asking questions, tell them nothing," he said on the second night, his voice low as they sat in his study. "If they threaten you, send word to Senator Marcus Flavius. He owes me a debt and will offer protection." "And if you don't come back?" Livia asked quietly. Cassian's jaw tightened. "Then you take Aurora and run. There's gold hidden beneath the stables, enough to buy passage to Britannia or Gaul. Marcus knows men who can escort you. Promise me, Livia. Promise you'll save her if I fall." "I promise." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. But you're going to come back. He turned his hand over, letting their palms press together. When I'm in battle, when the curse takes hold, I lose myself in the bloodlust. I forget who I am. But these past weeks, having you here... He stopped, struggling with words. For the first time in 10 years, I have a reason to hold on to my humanity. You and Aurora, you've become my anchor. Then hold tight to that, Livia whispered. When the darkness comes, remember us. Remember you have people waiting for you to come home. On the morning of his departure, the household gathered in the courtyard. Aurora clung to her father's leg, refusing to let go. I don't want you to leave, she said, tears bright in her golden eyes. What if the beast doesn't let you come back? Cassian knelt before his daughter. Listen to me, little light. The gods may have cursed me, but they don't own me. Not anymore. I'm going to fight this last battle, and then I'm coming home. To you, to Livia, to the family we've built here. He pressed his forehead to hers. Be brave for me. Then he stood and turned to Livia. For a moment they simply looked at each other, and she saw everything he couldn't say, written in those golden eyes. Keep her safe, he said. Keep yourself safe, she countered. Come back to us, Cassian. He nodded, then crossed the distance between them and pulled Livia into a brief embrace. Thank you for seeing the man instead of the monster, he whispered against her hair. Then he was gone, spurring his horse down the road. They watched until he disappeared beyond the hills, and Livia felt Aurora's hand slip into hers. He'll come back, the child said. He has to. We're his family now. The days that followed were an agony of waiting. News trickled back slowly. The wolf had reached the frontier. The Dacians had been massacred in a single night. The revolt crushed, but there was no word from Cassian himself. Days stretched into a week. Then, too, Aurora grew quiet and withdrawn, spending hours staring out the window at the empty road. It was on the 18th day that Marcus burst into the villa. He's coming! The master is coming! Livia's heart leaped. She grabbed Aurora's hand and they ran outside. In the distance, a figure on horseback moved slowly, laboriously. As it drew closer, her relief transformed into concern. Cassian was barely staying in the saddle. His armor was shredded, blood covering him entirely. He slid from his horse and nearly collapsed, Marcus rushing to support him. As they helped him inside, Livia got her first clear look at his face and gasped. His eyes were still golden but dim, exhausted. Deep gashes marked his body. His breathing was labored. Most disturbing, his claws were fully extended and wouldn't retract. They got him onto a bench in the main hall. What happened? Livia asked, kneeling beside him. He looked at her and she saw wildness that hadn't fully receded. The battle, I won, slaughtered them all, but I couldn't stop. The bloodlust was too strong. I kept killing even after they surrendered. Our own soldiers had to trap me, had to wait 3 days for the rage to pass. But you came back, Livia said firmly, taking his face in her hands. You're here. You're home. Barely. His voice was hollow. I'm losing, Livia. The curse is winning. Every transformation makes it harder to change back. Soon there won't be anything left of the man at all. No. The word came out fierce. I won't accept that. We didn't wait 18 days for you to come home just so you could give up. I'm facing reality, Cassian said bitterly. The gods have won. Aurora had been frozen in the doorway, but at his words, something broke inside her. She ran forward, throwing herself at Cassian despite the blood and claws. You promised, she cried. You can't give up now, Papa. I need you. Livia needs you. We're your family. Cassian's arms came up to hold his daughter, and he winced as his claws grazed her back. Not piercing, but close. Horror flashed across his face, and he tried to pull away, but Aurora held tight. I love you, the child said simply. The gods can't take that away. Love is stronger than curses. Something shifted in Cassian's expression. His breathing began to slow. The wildness receded slightly. Livia placed her hand on his shoulder. When I laid my hand upon his face, the transformation stopped. The curse broke. That's what we're going to do. Together. Cassian stared at her. That's impossible. The gods demanded violence. Livia interrupted. You've given them that. But love is something they didn't account for. She moved closer, placing both hands on either side of his face. Come back, all the way back. Choose us over the curse. Choose love over rage. Choose to be a man again. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, incredibly, she felt it, the change beginning to reverse. The fur along his arms receded. The wildness in his eyes dimmed, and his claws began to retract. It was slow, painful, but inch by inch the obsidian claws withdrew, replaced by normal human nails. His frame settled back into fully human proportions. The last traces of fur disappeared. When it was done, Cassian knelt before them, fully human, scarred, bloodied, exhausted, but human. "How?" he whispered, staring at his hands. "Because the god's power ends where love begins," Livia said. "And you, Cassian of Rome, are loved. By your daughter, by your household, by me." He looked up at her, wonder mixed with disbelief. "You can't love a monster." "I don't," she said, smiling through tears. "I love a man, a father, a warrior who fought his way back from darkness because he had people waiting for him." Aurora wrapped her arms around both of them. "We're a family now. The curse can't take that away." And there in the villa's main hall, Cassian wept, not tears of sorrow, but of relief. The curse wasn't completely broken. On certain nights the beast would stir, and Cassian's eyes would glow gold again, but he had learned the secret, that curses only had power over those who accepted them, and Cassian had chosen differently. He had chosen love over violence, family over isolation, humanity over the divine mandate to be a weapon. In the years that followed, stories spread through Rome of how the wolf had been tamed, not by chains, but by the compassion of a widow and the love of a child. The emperor granted him official discharge. The villa became a sanctuary for others marked by fate, seeking refuge from a world that feared them. Livia ran the household with quiet strength, becoming the heart around which everything revolved. And every spring, on the anniversary of the day Livia had found Aurora by the river, they would walk together down to the water's edge. There they would leave flowers and say prayers to fate itself, which had brought them together. The people of Rome would see them there and whisper among themselves. They would leave their own flowers by the river, offerings of gratitude to the strange family that had proven love could conquer even the will of the gods. For in saving a child, Livia had saved a warrior. In being saved, Cassian had found his humanity, and in loving them both, they had created something the gods had never intended. They had created a home,